to the Who's On Postgame report here at Scott Stadium, and here we are after a week of hype, college football playoff rankings, ACC huddle in town, all the works, and Virginia and Scott Stadium getting there for the third straight time, a crowd of 50+ thousand. That hasn't happened since back in 2008, 2009 when they did that leading up to the 2009 home opener, but all that, and everyone leaves here a little disappointed after tonight as Virginia falls to Wake Forest at home, 16-9, losing their first home game of the season. They had been 5-0 before that, losing their first ACC game of the season. They were 5-0 before that. And really, where do you start in a game like this? But we'll start with Chandler Morris and the injury there in the second quarter. Chandler Morris keeps the ball on a keeper, pulls it, runs, takes a late hit after he slides. Looks like a questionable maybe targeting call. Some people said, the helmet-to-helmet was with Wake Forest teammate. Either way, Chandler Morris ends up injured on the ground for a long time. Trainers were down there with him for a long time, and eventually Morris has to exit the game and head straight back to the tunnel. He did come back out later on in street clothes, but all in all, Chandler Morris was out from basically the very beginning of the second quarter. So Daniel Kalen was the quarterback for the large majority of this game for Virginia tonight. And there's always going to be kind of a little asterisk on this game because what happens if Chandler Morris plays out the game? Now, I will start by saying the offense had not looked productive with Chandler Morris at quarterback either. But again, this offense has not looked productive in a lot of games this season with Chandler Morris at quarterback, especially in the last 5 or so games, but they have found a way to win games later on. Virginia had chances to win this one. They were down 16-9. And obviously we'll talk about the last drive where Virginia, after fumbling the ball 3 times tonight, giving up a punt return touchdown, multiple field goals, they still had a chance at the very end to come back and win this game. They have 2 plays from, I believe it was 3rd and 6 from the 8-yard line for Wake Forest. And they have 2 plays. First play, they get a little bit of yards, 3 yards, and then they got to run another play quickly. They had a man zone kind of read play. They go for the jump ball in the corner of the end zone. Daniel Kalen said afterwards that he just didn't, he put a little too much on that one, never gave Jamal Edgerrin a chance to catch that play, and that was it. Players, hands in their head, or helmet or heads in their hands, kind of down on the turf on the field here at Scott Stadium. Really disappointing. And it was a disappointing night overall for Virginia as they kind of came into this thinking, what happens if they win tonight and they keep winning against Duke and they win against Virginia Tech? Then maybe they get into the college football playoff, as an at-large, and they don't have to worry as much about the ACC championship game. Well, now the ACC championship game comes into primary focus for this team because there are now 5 teams in the ACC with 1 loss on the season. This is going to be a wild ACC race to the very end. The most 1-loss teams that you can have in the ACC are 3 because Duke and Virginia will play each other, so that will eliminate 1. And then Georgia Tech and Pittsburgh will play each other. That will eliminate another 1. So you could have at most 3 1-loss teams. Now, if teams drop multiple games down to 2 losses, that's when you get into more ACC chaos. But really what tonight is all about for Virginia is they controlled their own fate. Now they put their fate in the hands of the ACC chaos that we have seen unfolded this season. Obviously, Cal goes on the road, beats Louisville tonight in a really unexpected result there. So that's going to throw everything into a lot of confusion here. Talking a little bit more about this game in hand, though, because that's what the next focus is. They got to go to Duke, play a really tough game down there. I know Duke lost to UConn, but that was kind of a trap game because it didn't really matter for Duke as much. Now you get this game next week that is going to have a lot at stake for both sides, Virginia and for Duke. But looking at this one tonight, Virginia insisted on running the ball at interesting times. There was a 3rd and 7 there with Daniel Kalen at quarterback, and they go with an outside run to Jamari Taylor. Now on the night, Jamari Taylor was not able to break off much on those outside runs, and a lot of them went for 3 yards at best. So it was an interesting play call there. Some may suggest that maybe there's not a lot of faith in Daniel Kalen after the fumbles, and you just didn't want to put it in that hands, but a really interesting call there. Obviously, there was other situations where They didn't use the Jamari Taylor direct snap, which had been working for them in those short yardage situations. They used it once tonight, and it worked. It got them the first down. But really, if I go back to it, and I know there's a lot to talk about with Daniel Kalen, how the offense operated without him or with him. I go back to early in the game. First possession, Wake Forest punts it. Cam Robinson comes up the block. He almost has a chance to scoop that up and go and score there, but obviously couldn't quite get a handle on it. So Virginia takes over in great field position, and they get a field goal out of it. That's an opportunity right there that they needed to take advantage of to come out of the gates and kind of put their stamp on the game and go up by 7 early on. So that's 7 points right there. Then after the Chandler Morris injury, you get Daniel Kalen, his first series at quarterback of the night. He gets a 54-yard run down the field, which I think is the longest run by a quarterback for Virginia since Brennan Armstrong back in 2022 in the season opener for Tony Elliott against Richmond. He gets a huge run down there, and he steps out of bounds. Probably should have fought to stay in bounds. That's beside the point. You only get 3 points out of that possession too. You're talking about in those 2 possessions right there where you end up with 3 points, those could have been touchdowns, and we're having a completely different discussion about this game. On the other side, Wake Forest, they had one really productive drive on this entire game, and Virginia stopped them on 4th and goal with Robbie Ashford fumbling the toss to Damon Claiborne, and they didn't get any points out of that. Outside of that, their points came off a punt return touchdown where Tony Elliott said, the guys were in good position. Didn't look like they took good angles on that punt return touchdown. And that's how they got 88 yards on that and got the touchdown. That was their only touchdown of the game. Other than that, 3 fumbles for UVA. Wake Forest scores 6 points off of those 3 fumbles. And then another field goal on that last drive for Wake Forest where it just seemed like time and time again on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, there was no quarterback spy on Robbie Ashford in a game where the Demon Deacons only threw for 64 total yards. And there was no quarterback spy on Robbie Ashford on those plays, and he ran for the first down each of those times, sets up another field goal, and that's how they got all 9 of their points on offense in the night. So the defense played a pretty stellar game, all things considered, to keep them in this game with everything else going on the offensive side of the ball. The bright spots offensively were Jamari Taylor finally getting it going there in the 4th quarter especially. He had 19 carries for 98 yards, 5.2 yards per carry. Obviously had the big 43-yard one that then he fumbles on the next play where there's also a holding call. Just a lot of different things that just didn't go the right way for Virginia on the night. And that's what a lot of people are going to be talking about as you go away. The things that didn't go right for Virginia on this night. It's going to be a really interesting week, as obviously the biggest question looming over everything going into next week will be, is Chandler Morris healthy? Is he able to go? Tony Elliott couldn't comment on kind of what the injury was. It's safe to assume it's going to be tight to see if he's going to be able to play next week at Duke. So that means a week of Daniel Kalen, a week of Chandler Morris, Willie Woney play, and that's going to be the biggest question for Virginia going into next week. If Chandler Morris is able to play, that's great. If not, can Virginia kind of make something out of that and make something where they have confidence that they can get some points going offensively going in to Duke next week? That's going to be the big question, but still a lot out there to play for. Tony Elliott put it best tonight. They played with fire and they got burned tonight. That's what happened. So Virginia now 8-2 on the season, 2 games left at Duke, coming back home against Virginia Tech after the bye week. And still a possibility of playing for an ACC championship, but a lot of questions to answer before then. That's going to do it for the Who's On Postgame Report. Virginia falls tonight 16-9 to Wake Forest here in Scott Stadium. You can catch this on YouTube, obviously. You can catch all of our Who's On podcast over on YouTube, also on Apple and Spotify. We will be back later to recap this game in full. Also talk a little bit of hoops coming at you on Monday.